Okay, let's talk about the marimba. Now this is a full-size marimba. This is a 4.5 octave because we go down the low F here. Let's talk about the elements of the keyboard that you need to be aware of, and we'll have probably some quizzes over this kind of stuff. So let's learn the terminology. So we have the keys here. That's what you're hitting. Okay, we have naturals on the bottom. Okay, and then these that have the pattern of 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2. Those are the accidentals, or your flats and sharps. Now, not all keyboards start with 3. Sometimes they start with 2, sometimes they start with 1. So you need to be careful how you set up your keyboard, or things are going to be incorrect. So I'll try to help guide you through that, but let's talk about the terminology first. So you have string that goes through these bars, okay? Where the string goes through the bars, those are called the nodes, okay? And we do not want to hit on the nodes ever, okay? Where do we want to hit? Well, over both lower and upper manual, you have something called resonators. And you can see them better here because there's this opening here, right? So they're pipes, basically, that when you strike, the sound bounces around inside those and makes the marimba sound long and beautiful. So if you didn't have those resonators down here, then if you hit it, it would sound like you're hitting a piece of wood, plonk, right? It wouldn't go tone, right? So we need to make sure we're using those to help us. So we want to hit right over those resonators, which is basically dead center, okay? So if you're thinking about it, here's the node or the string, go directly to the center, and that's where you want to hit, okay? For now, we have other hit spots that we'll learn later. Okay, as far as height goes, your height adjustment, this one has a air pressure height adjustment knob here. Yours probably is on an X stand. So just like the snare drum, you want your arm to be at a natural angle for you, where it's slightly down, not like 45 degrees or below. Okay, so just like the snare drum, we don't want our arms to be super low or super high. We want to bend them up till they're even with the ground and then bring them down slightly. But your sticks will be parallel to the ground, but we're gonna mostly have them up here. Okay, so again, we don't want to be super low. So when you set up your X stand, you can make it smaller to make it higher or open it to make it lower. But try to adjust it where it's a natural position for your arm, where you're not having to be too low or too high, okay? Where you're just slightly down on the bunny slope here, okay? Where you can use your wrist. Okay, if you're super far down, look what you're doing with your wrist to play flat. If I get it here, look how much wrist I was wasting when I finally get into a good position, okay? So now you have all the flexibility of your wrist. When you're down here, you like barely have any wrist to use, okay? So make sure it's in a good position. Now, how do we hold the mallet? So basically, we want to hold the stick just like snare drum, where we get the fulcrum 1/3, and then wrap the fingers all the way around, and we should be able to see the butt of the stick on the outside of your hand, right? Not underneath like this. We don't want that. We want this. Put the fingers all the way around. But because it's smaller, you might have a few more gaps than you're used to. Or that first finger, we usually say on snare drum, to make sure the top of the knuckle and the thumb are even, you might actually have your first finger slightly above your thumb, okay, when you're holding marimba, and that's okay. So that's just because it's a smaller stick, okay? We still want to move from A to B, up and down, straight up and down. We still want our wrist to be flat, and we go straight up and down like we're knocking, okay? We don't want to rotate like this, no hang 10, we want to knock. If you do that, the stick should go outside of your hand. Again, if you have it underneath, it's going to hit your hand, okay? So like this. Cool. I will do another video later on what mallets that you're supposed to use on what instrument. On the marimba, these larger keys are getting pretty big here. So if you hit too hard or with the wrong mallet, you could crack those bars. So we want to make sure we're using cord or yarn wrapped mallets when we're playing a marimba. Later on, you're going to see some unwrapped acrylic mallets, and we only want to use those on xylophone and bells. And then some are so hard you don't even want to use them on xylophone. So once I get into the school, I'll make another video, because we'll need to pass a test based on that so we know how to take care of equipment. Okay, so now we need to understand some music theory things that will help us with learning where the notes are on the keyboard. Our musical alphabet is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I will have a separate video where we do the masters of the alphabet, but you know that after G is not H, it's A. Now, we need to determine where those are on the bottom lower manuals. That's where the alphabet lies. What I want you to do is I want you to look at the grouping of 2 here. If I can find it. Okay. Grouping of 2. Go to the left one. If you slide down onto the left, that is where C lives. Another way I think about this is you have the letter C, it has 2 points, right? 1, 2. So we have 2 here, slide down to the left. That's C. Okay, let's do the 3s. If I go to the left one and slide down to the left, that's where F is. Okay, and if you think of the letter F, it kind of has 3 points, sort of. But anyway, just memorize that, okay? F. So if I do this down the keyboard, here's 2, C. 2, slide down to the left, C. 2, slide down to the left, C. If I have 3, slide down to the left, that's F. This one is F. This one is F. So I'm going to point at something and you try to tell me what it is. F. 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 What's this one? Here's 2. Slide down. C. 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 Okay, so memorize that pattern, then you should be fine. Okay, so let's go from that C. If I go up in the alphabet, if I'm going to the right, I'm going forward in the alphabet, just like you read. If I'm going to the left, I'm going backwards in the alphabet. Okay, so C, what's next in the alphabet? D, E, aha, here's F. Look, it even matches with your grouping, right? F. Keep going. G, what's after G? Not H. A. Keep going. B, C, aha, there it is, grouping of 2, and they slide down to the left, that's C, D, E, F again, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, right? Okay, so there's this pattern. Now, the hard part is going backwards, right? So let's go from F. Here's slide down to the left, F, go backwards. What's before F? E, not G, E, you're going backwards. Keep going. D, there's your C, C, keep going, B, A, G, F. So you need to be a master of your alphabet, know how to say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then go backwards, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, and we'll cover that in the Masters of the Alphabet. So I'm gonna point at some random keys, and you tell me what the notes are. 2, slide down, that's C. Okay, so what's this? You went to the right of this note, you went here. So go forward in the alphabet. D. I'm gonna skip around now. What is that? Well, you could do this in 2 different ways. You could go, here's 2, slide down, that's C, go backwards, B, A, or you can go, I wanna figure out that note, I'm gonna slide down, that's F, G, forward in the alphabet, A. Okay, so you need to figure out, you need to kind of like go to a random note and figure it out until you feel like you're good to go. Okay, now let's go over flats and sharps. Okay, in music you're going to have something called flats and sharps. Okay, so a flat looks like this and a sharp looks like this, like a number sign. Oops. Okay, and then later on you're going to see naturals. So you're gonna, that's like I do an L and then a 7. Okay, now what do those things mean? Well, first of all, this is how that looks in music. So you can see some sharps right there. You can see some naturals there. There's that L7 that I drew. Okay, and then here's what a flat looks like. Okay, those flats, sharps, and naturals are referring to where to use these upper manual notes and sometimes the lower manual as well. So if we have nothing on the note, we're just talking about the bottom alphabet, A, B, C, D, F, G, A, B, C, D, F, G, like we just went over. Now, if we're talking about sharps and flats, then we have to start talking about half steps. Okay, so what are half steps? Half steps are the smallest interval that you can get in Western music. And the reason why I say that is you can get quarter steps, in Eastern music, which is why it sounds a little different to us because we're used to half step based in the Western world. Okay, so let's start at C here. If I go to the closest note to the right, that means I went up a half step. Okay, now how do I know it's a half step? It's the smallest it can get. Are there any notes in between this note and this note? The answer is no. So that's the smallest it can get. Okay, so that's a half step. If If I go from this note to this note, are there any notes in between those two notes? No, there's not, so that's a half step. Now, if I said, what about these two notes here? Are there any notes in between those two notes? Yes, there is. There's this note. So that's a half step here. And then from here to here is also a half step. So that creates a whole step because a half and a half equal a whole. Half plus a half equals a whole. Okay, I went half step to here, and then I kept going another half step, so that half and a half makes a whole. So that's a whole step here. So we need to know the difference between our whole steps and half steps. Now, I know that most of the time when we do half steps, it's going from here to here, but look here. Are there any notes between these two? A second ago, this was a whole step because it was a half plus a half, right? So you would go here and you go, oh, that's a whole step as well. Well, there's no note here. There's a break. We call this the break. There's no note. So there's any notes between these two notes? No. So that's also a half step. Okay? Same thing happens here where there's a break. That's a half step, not a whole step. Okay? Well, let's do one more that's kind of unique. Okay, this is a half step, right? Because there's no note in between. So that's a half step. Half step is the smallest you can get, right? If I talk about these two notes, what is that? Well, there's a half step and there's a half step. So these two, that's a whole step. Half, half. That's a whole step. Okay, so let's quiz you up here. What is this, a whole step or a half step? Well, there's a note in between, so that's a half plus a half. So that's a whole. What about these two notes? Where there's a note in between, half plus a half, that's a whole step. These two, whole step. These two, whole step. Okay, what about these two? That's a half step because there's no note in between. So it's the smallest it can get, so that's a half step. What's that? Half step, because there's no note in between them. What's that? It's also a half step because there's no note in between. Okay? Starting to understand a little bit? Okay, so now let's start talking about the sharps and the flats. Okay? So here's G. Okay, because there's our grouping of 3. Slide down to the left, that's F. One note forward in the alphabet, that's G. Okay, so there's my G. Now, what do I name these notes on top? Well, we're going to use our sharps and flats. So here's the way you think about it. Sharps will take you to the right a half step. Okay, and flats will take you to the left a half step. What does that mean? Okay, well, let's look at it on the keyboard. I have G here, right? Here's G. If I go up a half step, that is G sharp, because a sharp goes to the right. G sharp, so that's G sharp. Okay, now if I take that G and I go here and I go to the left, that's making it flat. So I'm going down a half step to the left, so that's G flat. Yes, there's two types of G's. G sharp, G flat. Okay, the way I kind of think about it is I was really into Ninja Turtles, and the sharp signs really look like Chinese stars to me, or ninja stars. And so you throw ninja stars forward, okay? So I go boom up here, okay, to the right. Whereas a flat kind of looks like on the side, it looks like a sled. Like let's say you're on the sled. Here's my picture of me, yay. Okay, and the sled will go down the hill. Okay, this is my great drawing here, okay? So the flat will take you down to the left, so G flat. So it's possible for these upper manual notes to have two names. For example, this is G what? Went to the right a half step. G what? G sharp. Well, what if I do A? Here's A, right? If I go down to the left, that's A flat. This note is G sharp, it's also A flat. So these upper notes have two different names, and some of the lower notes too, which we'll explain later, but those are called N harmonics, E-N, N harmonics. You have two different names for the same note, okay? So I'll go through this quickly because you can rewind this. This is B flat, but it's also A sharp. We already went over this. This is A flat, and it also is G sharp. This is G flat. It's also F sharp. You could get, well, let's do these two here, right? So this is D flat, D flat. This also is C sharp, C sharp. This note here is D sharp to the right, E flat to the left. Okay, so like I said, sometimes you can use sharps and flats to the bottom. So in those circumstances, again, it's where the break is. Where the break is where you don't have a note, right? In these patterns of 3, 2, 3, right? So this is C natural, right? If you take it to the left, you took it down a flat, right? A half step, makes it flat. So that's C flat. It's also B natural, right? Because it's before C. So this has two names too. This is C flat and it's B natural. Likewise, C, obviously this is C. So if you take it if you take this B up to the right half step, that's B sharp. So this is C and it's also B sharp. Kind of weird. We don't really use that often, but I want to make sure you know. So this is F, so it's also E what? E to the right, E sharp. So this is E natural. So if you take it from F and go down a half step, that's F flat. Again, we don't use that often, but you should know. Okay, so this is E natural, or regular E, or F flat. This is F natural, or regular F, and it's also E sharp. Okay, so naturals. So why are the naturals important? So again, here's what a natural looks like. Here's the natural. So the natural basically says, hey, I know it says to do D sharp, but I want you to do D natural. So it just cancels out the sharp. So let's say for a piece of music, you have been playing D sharp for the whole piece, and then you see that natural sign, then you'll actually just play the normal D and don't play it as sharp. Okay, so natural just cancels out the flat or the sharp and tells you to play on the bottom for the regular note. Okay, let's start relating this to reading music on the staff. So staff is made up of 5 lines. Okay, and our music alphabet lays on there. Okay, so let's focus within the staff first. So we have 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You always count from the bottom. So if I reference line 2, you're counting 1, 2. Or if I reference 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, what about the spaces? How many spaces do you see? 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. Always reference from the bottom up. Okay, so we are going to learn 2 clefs. We're going to learn treble clef and bass clef, but let's focus on treble clef. The treble clef is also called the G clef. I think this kind of looks like a G right here, but then this also wraps to this line, which is a G. All right, so I'm going to send you to a reference of how to figure out treble clef, and we will learn that on a YouTube clip. So please watch, and then we'll learn how to relate them to finding them on the keyboard.